So the tool is called R3 Score, and it's risk, readiness, and reward. And we're hoping to be able to launch that a little bit later this year.
So let's talk about that in just 1 second, but I want to take a step back. And I'm glad you mentioned technology, because technology can be something that opens doors and creates solutions. Misuse of technology or poor use of technology can be things that shuts doors. So turning to both Alvaro and to Arthur, this area of criminal background checks and the idea of how to ensure, if you will, whether or not somebody, or to at least promote how somebody can be more successful. There's a lot of systemic issues that come along with the issue of criminal records. So Alvaro, if you could start by talking about some of the things that you've looked at, and then I'll turn to Arthur too.
Sure. So there's two issues that folks should be aware of with these background checks, because they're not really what they seem. A lot of times an employer will say, oh, well, we're hiring you, we're going to get your fingerprints, we have to run a background check, that's just standard procedure. And they'll take the fingerprints, they'll submit them to the FBI, which is the repository of these fingerprints, and there'll be a check. But what you don't know is that half of the entries into the national FBI fingerprint database don't actually have information on the final disposition of the case. Okay, so someone was arrested, right? They won't say, were they convicted? Were they found innocent? Were they never even charged? Or were they charged and then have the charges dropped? So the databases that supposedly provide you information about, the person's background only have half the story. And it gets worse. Why does it get worse? Well, in the 1970s we passed the Privacy Act. The Privacy Act of 1974, it gave people certain rights to data held by the government about them. And if you read it quickly, it seems like a really great law. You get to see what the government knows about you. You get to correct it. If there's mistakes, you get to know who it's been shared with. But littered throughout the law and added to that law over the course of many years are lots of exceptions. And you can bet that one of the exceptions is for law enforcement. And so these records that are held for employment background checks are maintained in law enforcement systems that are exempt from all these rules of the Privacy Act that make sure, that give you the right to know, okay, what does the government know about me? Is that information accurate? And if it's not accurate, how do I correct it? And so this whole infrastructure of fingerprinting is actually exempt from all these rules. The FBI says they have an alternate system that addresses these requirements, but it's kind of a shadow of a system. What do I mean by that? So let's say you do have a record, right? You were arrested and you're convicted of X, all right? But you want to make sure, you keep on getting dinged because it was a fairly minor thing. Let's say it was just a very, a misdemeanor offense. You were convicted though, okay? So if you go, you actually do not have a right under the Privacy Act to access that information. You have to use the FBI's alternative system. And let's say you find the record, and it doesn't say you were arrested and convicted of X. It says you were arrested and convicted of Y, which is a much more serious crime. All right? Then the question is, how the heck do I get this fixed? And the answer is not you ask the FBI to fix it. Because what the FBI will tell you is that, well, that's not an FBI record, that's a state record. It's on the state to fix it. And so, if you submit a fix request to us, a correction request to us, we're not going to deal with it, we're just going to forward it to a state. Okay, so this is a system maintained, used, and operated by FBI. But when it comes to the accuracy of that system, too often the FBI washes its hands of that problem. And so not only do you have folks who are factually innocent, right, who are arrested, never charged, had charges dropped, being dinged by these background check systems, you have folks who might end up in these systems, yes, who committed an offense, were convicted of that offense, but have wrong information in the system, who have a really difficult time fixing it and addressing it. So these background checks in a law enforcement setting are not doing people good. Instead, we need to have a different system, and one that doesn't suffer from these problems.
Yeah, Arthur, you were a former prosecutor, read a ton of rap sheets. I was a former prosecutor as well. Read rap sheets and saw, like, when you see arrest, and then you see a disposition, sometimes the case is that all of those arrests and charges may have been all pled or convicted under one conviction, but it doesn't clean up everything else that says this has been, disposed of by this. So if somebody who's an employer or somebody who's not involved in the kind of the criminal justice process sees that, all you see is arrest, 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 and then you see kind of a conviction. You don't see necessarily dismissal that's attached to it. So it has it could have an inaccurate portrayal of a person. What are some of the things that, other things of why R Street kind of, and you in particular, went into this area specifically of criminal background checks, technology, and employment?
Sure. Let me shake your tree a little bit first. We talked about the 5%, 70%. But let's put those numbers in perspective when it comes to employment and the idea of lowering crime rates through what I call the dignity of work. What the Catholic Church has coined. I thought I coined that phrase, then I found out that was wrong. We'll put it on. Wikipedia's going to say you did it. That's what happens when a Jew starts to quote Catholicism. But 1 out of 3 individuals, 1 out of 3 people, maybe not in this room, will have a criminal history record in the United States. 1 out of 3. So if you take those numbers and you start looking at what that means to our criminal justice system, it starts becoming very profound. Let me take one tiny little statistic for you and put it into play. If you go to jail pre-trial, you are innocent until you are proven guilty in the United States of America. If you go to jail and you stay in jail for more than 24 hours, the chance of you committing new crimes skyrocket. Now, that number is not as simple as because jail makes you a worse person, because I don't think that's entirely true, and I think it doesn't doesn't take into play the socioeconomic backgrounds. But if you were in jail for 7 days, you have a 70% chance, a higher chance of committing new crimes. If it's only 3 days, you have a 40% chance of committing new crimes. Now, I know it's not just jail makes you harder, but I also know there's something about jail that it entices people and changes people. And I think it's because you lose your job. And I think when you lose your job, and I've been out of work. Anybody here been out of work? It is horrifying. It takes something from you. It takes your dignity. It makes you afraid. And I think fear is what is the driving factor here. Because if you take this, these are low-risk individuals. So we can argue about what a low-risk individual is. But usually low risk is ties to community, not a very no substantial criminal history record. But if you look at high-risk individuals, there is no change for how long they stay in jail. High-risk individuals because the crime they committed or they had numerous convictions. I think it's something that's also very important about the FBI background check is look at what the database was invented for.
Right.
It was invented. Excuse me. It was invented as an investigative tool. And it is a great investigative tool. So, Jesse, I'm sorry to pick on you, but if you're in a car with Miss Moss, and you guys are in a car together, and a cop pulls you over, and he feels like something is not right, but he can't prove it. He doesn't have probable cause, but he feels in his gut. That's good policing. Gut feelings are good policing as long as they don't cross the line and violate your constitutional rights. But if he feels something's not right, but he can't prove it, he might write what's called a contact card. Well, that contact card it says, Jesse, it's in a car with Miss Moss. Something smelled wrong, don't know what it is, files it. That goes into a state database. Sometimes it goes all the way up to the FBI database. Now, Jesse, if you end up dead a week later, they might go talk to Sasha Moss. You were in a call with her. That's good policing. Now, there might be some privacy issues that you freak out about. That's okay. But that is good policing, and that is what the FBI background check was designed to do, good policing. And good policing does not mean have a system that's 50% wrong, end up serving as a vetting source for employment. So to kind of fold the page on your question, we know that recidivism, the number one way to lower recidivism is through employment. So what this coalition wants to do and what I want to do and what R Street wants to do is tag that statistic and help people get a job because we know that lowers crime.
So, in terms of the employer, right? And you all are employers, whether or not you have your own company you've done hiring. A lot of people in this room have done hiring. So there are different types of mechanisms and procedures. There are different types of worries and concerns that everybody who hires somebody considers. Top of all, at the very top, can this person work? Is this person qualified? But the issue of qualifications is one of the areas where the whole criminal background check, whether or not you have a criminal history, comes into play. So let's talk a little bit more of each of your all's role as an employer or somebody who hires. And what are some of the things that you can help other employers consider in terms of how to look at a candidate who may have a criminal record, or not even a candidate, a job application or a job opening where you may want to either proactively hire somebody who has a criminal record, or at the very least open your applicant pool so that those people aren't excluded from that applicant pool. And so Teresa, I'll start with you. I mean, you talked about this this tool that you provide, this R3, I believe. And so let's start with you.
Well, if I go backwards, I once ran a small HR department, and I was often tasked with the responsibility of dwindling the pool of applicants down to 5 or 10. And by virtue of that, we looked for every reason possible to dwindle it down. So unless I had a directive that said, we're not looking for individual, or we're open and we're very intentional about hiring, many HR professionals are just finding reasons to eliminate candidates. That's just kind of the nature of their job. I applied for one job since I came home from prison and had a horrific experience and decided that it spoke to the dignity of work, that I did not have the ability to continue down that path. I was looking for a job, working from my home, using my computer, doing back office work, one of those jobs is like make a little bit of money helping someone else. And I went through the application process online. I put in my very basic demographic stuff, my name, my address, and so forth. Right after that was the question, have you ever been convicted of a crime? I checked the box yes, and the screen went black. And what came up next was, something you answered disqualifies you for this opportunity.
Something.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, I know it wasn't my name, my address, and very basic stuff. But what it was saying was that I did not have the ability to work from my home using my computer and my resources to do back office work for someone. And so, there has to be a better way. But in that moment, I'll never forget how I felt in that moment. I made the conscious decision that I will never put myself in that position again. And so for me, I really kind of doubled down on my own capacity and ability to just build something for myself and build something for other people that would counteract, that.
So Marcus, you specifically go out and hire or want to hire people who have been formerly incarcerated or who have criminal records. That is somewhat different than most companies in the United States, but why is that your mission? And then secondly, is there anything that other places can learn from your experience about how you hire or your experience with people who are formerly incarcerated as employees?
So two-part question, I'll unpackage it. The first one, yeah, so absolutely. I mean, when applicants come into my office and we don't even have a checkbox for that, but I shouldn't, you give me the idea to now do it just for fun. But, when applicants come to my office, I get excited when when you start telling me, you have a conviction. I'm like, oh, man, you should see how many felonies I have. It really changes the dynamic of the conversation from that point forward, in our offices and all of my, in my staff.